Okay. So I'm Rachel Jordan, policy analyst at DHCD. And I just wanted to briefly introduce the DHCD and ARC staff that we have with us. From our DHCD side, we have Matt Weaver. And if you wanted to introduce yourself, say hi really quick. If you're a DHCD staff, go ahead.
Good morning, Matt Weaver.
Morning, Kathy Beek.
Good morning, the other Kathy Boatwright, Abingdon Field Office.
I'm Tamara Holmes. I'm the Virginia ARC Program Manager. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, all. I'm Stuart Burrell. I'm with the Abingdon Field Office.
Bill Hartley, I'm in the Abingdon Field Office.
Kelly Chirpich, also in the Abington Field Office.
Marcia Dempsey, also in the Abingdon Field Office.
And I'll add, I'm from the Richmond office, Richmond representing.
I'm Deanna Stoddard. I'm also with the Abingdon Field Office.
Okay, so that might be our DHCD staff. How about the ARC staff, if you guys could introduce yourselves.
Morning, I'm Megan Robinson. I'm a program manager on the Business Workforce Investment team. I've been with ARC for about a year and a half. Excited to be with you all today.
I'm Sarah. Oh, sorry. I'm Sarah Arney. I am also a program analyst for the Division of Critical Infrastructure, mostly construction projects. I have been with ARC for roughly a year.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Lauren Wood. I work with Megan at or in BWI, program manager that oversees ARC's health portfolio and manage our Inspire initiative.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Snell. I'm a program analyst with ARC working in their technical assistance division.
Morning, everyone. I'm Lexi Oliva, and I am a program coordinator with ARC in the technical assistance program.
Okay, I think that was everybody. So we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, we have a lot of information to cover. This presentation, the slides, as well as the recording will be on the website later this week or next week. Just a note for all the registrants, we will be monitoring the chat as we go along, so feel free to put any questions you have in there and we will answer them as we go along, but there will also be a short time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so this is our how to apply. This is just a overview agenda of how we're going to flow through this presentation. I'm going to kick us off with some high-level information of ARC and then how it's run in Virginia. And then we'll have information on project development and specific application information, as well as the Inspire program. And then a short, very short Q&A. And also, if we don't get to your question today, feel free to email us, reach out to us in any way, and we'd be more than happy to follow up with you and schedule another meeting to answer your questions. So the Appalachian Regional Commission is a federal economic development partnership with 13 member states, Virginia being one of them, and 12 other states. The goal is to strengthen economic growth in the Appalachian region. The ARC vision statement is that Appalachia is a region of great opportunity that will achieve socioeconomic parity with the nation. The ARC mission statement is innovate, partner, and invest to build community capacity and strengthen economic growth in Appalachia. As I mentioned, there are 13 states that make up the Appalachian region. The map here, the states in white belong to the ARC region, and they encompass 26 million people. The ARC strategic goal areas, these were recently developed in the strategic development plan of ARC from 2023 to 2027, I believe. The strategic goals are to create economic opportunities, develop a ready workforce, build critical infrastructure, cultivate natural and cultural assets, and foster leadership and community capacity. For applications to be eligible for ARC, eligible entities can include state and local governments, local governing boards, nonprofit organizations, Native American tribes, and higher education institutions. These eligible applicants, you must be registered with SAM. So go to sam.gov. It's a very simple application, but it does take a couple days to process. So don't put it off to the last minute. Local match is required. We're going to go into that in greater detail later. And then for any project to receive ARC funding, it must advance at least one of ARC's current strategic goals. And we'll go into more detail for that later. So some specific Virginia information. There are 4 distressed counties in the ARC, including the city of Norton, as well as 27 other census tracts designated as distressed, which is red on this map here. And then we have at-risk counties, transitional counties, and then one attainment county, as well as distressed areas within those counties. So this is just a list of all of the eligible ARC localities in Virginia. Virginia ARC is served by 7 local development districts. In Virginia, they're also known as planning district commissions. Those are listed here. If you go to the PDC website, that will also include the map and contact information. And we encourage you to reach out to your PDCs if you are planning to apply for any ARC funding. So Virginia's investment priorities are updated annually based on a public input process. These are meant to align with ARC's strategic goals, but more focused on how to strengthen economic growth within Virginia's most distressed areas in ARC. So this year, our investment priorities are for broadband infrastructure, water and wastewater infrastructure, small business and entrepreneurial efforts to strengthen local and regional capacity, address unmet housing needs, and to support affordable housing efforts within economic development, and expand energy sources. So this chart is just the funding caps for each bucket of ARC funding that you can apply for. Construction grants are eligible to receive up to $700,000. Non-construction is eligible for up to $100,000. Planning grants for a single locality are up to $50,000 or $100,000 for regional applications. Regional non-construction is up to $250,000, and access road applications are eligible to receive up to $500,000. This is just a rough estimated timeline of the ARC application process. The ARC applications are due March 1st. DHCD will conduct our reviews and make those recommendations to the governor in April. Then the governor's office will review those. And once we receive what is to be approved, we send the applications to ARC. ARC does their reviews, and approvals are made between July and September, so late summer, early fall. And then we will hopefully be able to get the approved applications under contract by the end of the year or January of 2024. And next, I think we are going to hand it over to ARC to talk about project development and then construction and non-construction.
All righty. Thank you very much, Rachel. And thank you all for being here. We're looking forward to the content today. We are going to go as quickly as we can through what is a lot of content. This section of the presentation will be me and Megan. We are kind of representing construction and non-construction projects that correspond to the BWI and DCI portions of ARC, but we'll definitely call out, there's a lot of overlap in project development and project applications for construction and non-construction, but we'll specifically call out for you where those things are different. Please use these slides and the recording for future reference, and use the chat box for questions. So for project development, we're gonna go broadly and then narrow in. We have a question about where to get the slides after this, which I think we can address at the end of the presentation. So broadly, ARC, as you saw earlier, we invest in projects that are strategic, impactful, collaborative, and sustainable. Strategic, that they follow ARC's strategic plan, but also Virginia's strategic plan, your own LDD's strategic plan, and as well as strategic planning for that particular project. That it's impactful, that it has meaningful and substantial ways of describing the impact of the project, which we'll talk about later in the correspondence to our performance measures, which is how we talk about impact. Collaborative, the way that you describe the partnerships that you have, the support that you have from the community, which we talk about in sustainability and in letters of support or letters of commitment, and sustainable, that after the project ends, that there is a way to either fund the implementation of a plan or to continue the performance measures that are being described for the particular project. You saw the strategic investment goals specifically. These can correspond to a variety of projects that are both construction and non-construction. So for example, our first goal is building Appalachian business, which could look like providing technical assistance to businesses, could be tourism promotion, it could be industrial site development, things like building Appalachia's infrastructure. We do a lot of water and sewer projects. Building regional culture and tourism could be, again, tourism promotion or a construction project like trail construction. Finally, goal 5, building community leaders and capacity, things like community strategic planning or supporting community leaders through other kinds of training. But you will, in your application, be asked to show how your project connects to one of these strategic goals. Honing in a little bit further, there are some kinds of projects where ARC has particular policies, and I'll just note 2 for you. The first is ARC's residential infrastructure policy. So we generally fund water and sewer projects that serve both residences and businesses, trying to support that economic development. But we can also fund projects that serve only residences in distressed counties. There are a few exceptions to that. you can fund a project for an at-risk or a transitional county if there's a compelling need shown, it's for disaster relief, if there is a specific health mandate from the EPA or a state agency, or it is a self-help project, which generally means that the grantee is taking on a lot of the work and the labor to perform the work. The second one is our tourism and outdoor recreation infrastructure policy. This one has been developed as the interest in outdoor recreation has grown exponentially, and we get a lot more of these projects. The main thrust of this policy is that it is part of the strategic plan for the community or the region, that developing the outdoor recreational infrastructure somehow translates to having a consistent way to bring in more visitors, which then supports the economy of the area, and that is articulated somewhere in a plan and is supported in the development of the project. And so we also encourage people to apply for planning grants in order to establish that strategic plan before their implementation. Getting even narrower, just a few issues to remember. ARC generally has not funded projects that are for municipal buildings and services, things like police and fire assets, courthouse repair, routine road maintenance or paving, and also projects with high indirect rates, which are sometimes a challenge, although those indirect rates are negotiated with other federal agencies generally. And so that's just another part of describing the application. Okay, but most fundamentally when developing a project, this is a good framing when using it for things like the project description, which we'll talk about later, or the strategic rationale for what your project is and why you would like ARC to fund it. Outlining the problem that you're trying to solve or the opportunity that you're trying to meet, why that particular solution to the problem or the plan to take advantage of the opportunity is the best way to address that issue or achieve that opportunity, that it's in line with your strategic plan with Virginia and with ARC, that the plan translates to clear measures, that it is within the scale of the project and the funding that you have. And also that somebody who knows nothing about the project or knows nothing about the area or the particular problem or opportunity that you have would be able to read your application and clearly understand what is most important about this project. I'm seeing a comment, do you include with municipal buildings that you don't generally fund library construction? I believe in my experience, I have done a project that was some strategic planning around a library expansion. I think we would probably take that on a case-by-case basis, but the project that I have in mind specifically discussed how the expansion was going to be for things that were related to our strategic goals, like entrepreneur, business development, access to broadband, and the kinds of things that would translate to supporting businesses, training students, and other things that were clear connections in our performance measures. But that is a good question.
Hey, Sarah, it's Tara. I'll just jump in. We have had some projects in Virginia where a library might have been included as a larger scale project. And so there might be a library that actually serves as a community center. And so we have actually done that, not necessarily a standalone library, but some planning related to a library or a library expansion project, as Sarah mentioned, that might be part of a larger scale community center effort within the locality.
Yes, thank you, Tamara. That makes a good reference to, I think, some of the earlier examples like police and fire or road construction are more specific to that use or are generally only used by by the municipal employees. All right. Next slide. All right, now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of preparing an ARC application. In the next slide, you'll see our project application checklists. This is really your greatest reference point when thinking about what needs to be in an application. Our biggest pro tip is to be clear, concise, comprehensive, and consistent. The link that was just dropped in the chat is also a link to our general grant resources. When we talk about forms or some templates that we have for this application, this link is another good way to find those additional resources. So again, there are some slight differences in construction and non-construction, and through the rest of this presentation, slides that are marked with this star are going to be the ones that let you know that this is specifically for construction. So for ARC construction projects, I will address the question in the chat in 1 minute. ARC does not manage its own construction projects. We have partnerships with other agencies, state agencies like our registered state basic agencies, or federal agencies like USDA Rural Development or EDA. Our strongest partner, or strong partner in Virginia, is DHCD, who does a lot of basic agency management. So after your project is approved, management transfers to the basic agency until the project closes. So while you will work with an ARC program analyst throughout the project and as part of the project development, your basic agency will be the one who also does a lot of interaction with your project. And so it's part of the checklist to have a basic agency for your project that you know will administer it if ARC funds it. This is another slide kind of explaining that. DHCD is Virginia's registered state basic agency. They will provide a letter as part of the application submission to ARC. So you will be in coordination with DHCD, both as part of your application development and to get this basic agency letter. Can you combine construction and non-construction portions of a project in one ask? Yes, in some cases. I think there are different extent to which that happens. There are sometimes preferences about there's different management things that go into construction and non-construction, but if you have a construction project, it is again important that you talk to DHCD about that, because they would be the ones who are administering the construction portion of that project or the entire portion of that project, and it would be their decision about whether they would like to administer that. I don't know if DHCD has anything else that they want to add to that. Okay. Oh, sorry. Come on.
So we have had some projects that have had both. We are offering technical assistance. We always offer technical assistance on projects. And so I would say reach out to the team and schedule a call to discuss, because each project is different. And so we may say, for example, shift some of your construction money, maybe to soft cost versus to actual construction. Because part of the thing you will know with ARC is you trigger certain federal rules and requirements if you use money for construction. And so there may be, not that I want to circumvent federal rules, sorry, my federal friends are on the call, but we may want to be strategic in what you ask for from ARC versus what you use your match funding for construction, because it might be an easier way for the project to go through. And so I'll just kind of say that it's on a case-by-case basis, but definitely reach out for TA.
Thank you. So getting into the first part of the checklist, the first element is the executive summary, but we generally recommend that people do this last. It is just a brief summation of the things that we're going to talk about later. It's roughly 2 pages, and the link on the slide, but also the grant resources link as a great template that you can use to fill this out. Goals and strategies, as we mentioned before, connecting your project to the strategic goals of your state and of ARC is very important. You can find what those strategies are and plug that in with those documents. Okay, I know that you are tired of my voice. I will transfer it over to Megan.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning once again. And just to let you all know, I am struggling with a little bit of cold. So wish me luck. There is not a coughing fit, and bear with me with my stuffiness. So let's talk a little bit about the project description. So the project description is where you will start to really describe what it is you intend to do with your ARC award. So typically the project description can be covered in 1 to 2 paragraphs. In the first 1 to 2 sentences will describe the project's primary purpose, some of your main activities, and expected outcomes. So again, try to keep it as succinct as possible. You'll also use this section to provide a detailed work plan where you can further flesh out all the connections between your planned activities and how they will lead into your intended outcomes. I personally love a good work plan. I find the work plan can serve as a nice roadmap that you can continue to refer back to if and when you're awarded. So when you put together the work plan, try to really put some thought into it and frame it as a useful document that you'll share with key staff members. You can share it with partners and other stakeholders, really to help ground them in the who, what, when, where of the project. So as you see on this slide, a work plan should include a description of all your project activities, as well as who's going to be responsible for them, a general timeline for when they can be accomplished, and milestones for marking progress. I just got a message to reboot my computer. Give me 1 second. You gotta love it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so a little bit more about the project description. You'll also use this section to identify the counties where the proposed project will be based, as well as the counties that are going to be directly served. So you can attach maps of the service area if that's helpful. And this is particularly important if you have water sewer projects, as well as outdoor recreation and broadband projects. It can be really important to include those maps. If the project is not county-wide, you'll want to identify the census tracts and the economic status, particularly if it's a distressed area of the project's entire service area. And the ARC website that I know was linked earlier in the chat has some really helpful tables and maps where you can find economic status in counties of distressed areas if you need additional help. But we're going to look deeper into what Virginia looks like in just a little bit. And then, of course, your state team or state program manager and the team there can also be a really helpful resource with these designations if you need additional support. Sarah, I'm going to toss it back over to you.
The next section is your strategic rationale. We go 2 slides. As we talked about earlier, in your project development, you've pretty much already done this when you were thinking about what your project would be, what the problem is, what the opportunity is, why this is the best, most practical, and most cost-effective way to achieve your desired results, and the specific impacts that you believe that this will make on the community. Also, another note is that if this is a part of a continuation of an existing program, or if this is part of a larger strategy which may have had other projects or even other ARC involvement up to this point, it's always great to reiterate that for us and for just out telling that story of how it's part of a larger initiative. This is also a good place to talk about other benefits that might result from the project, which don't necessarily coordinate to our performance measures. Our performance measures are very specific, which talk about businesses served, households served, trainees served and improved. But there are often benefits that are happening outside of those specific performance measures, which you may want to talk about. And this would be a good place to talk about those benefits. There is a requirement that you have support letters from stakeholders that would benefit from the project. This can be businesses, community stakeholders, individuals that might use something like a new trail, community groups. But it is also important that you try and avoid template support letters. And it's not, I think these template support letters can be helpful in that you provide guiding points for folks who may not usually write letters of support. But when the language becomes verbatim and it's reading the same paragraphs, it can be hard for us to interpret the specific benefit that groups are getting and the variety of kinds of benefit that groups might be getting from this project. So avoid verbatim template letters if you can. All right, back to Megan.
Cool. All right, so this the next section of the checklist addresses partnerships, and this is where you'll describe any collaborations with local community organizations, maybe nonprofit groups, public agencies at regional, state, even federal level. So in addition to any description that you provide, you also, as Sarah mentioned, want to submit letters of engagement with partner organizations, really demonstrating their commitment to specific activities that they will be responsible for. Again, you want them to get specific in their letters. So, are they going to be donating classroom space for the project? Are they going to serve on an advisory council? Maybe they're providing referrals to your program. So you just want to make sure that you add those specific details in those partnership letters. We do read them. I remember being in your shoes thinking, do they really read all these letters that are attached? Yes, and they provide really helpful information. So next slide. Sarah, I'm going to toss it back to you.
All right. This is a very big and important chunk of a project application, talking about the impact in terms of ARC's kind of specific performance measures. So please definitely use the chat if anything that I'm saying doesn't make sense or if I am moving too quickly through it. I'm going to drop in the chat very quickly the guide to our ARC project performance measures. This guide is very helpful in describing all of the measures that we have and when you might want to use particular measures over others. So in order to talk about impact, ARC tracks measures at the beginning of a project, what you estimate the outcome will be, at the project close, so by that closing date of your project, the things that have happened, and up to 3 years after closeout, which is verification. So depending on the kind of project that you have, you will have performance measures that might differ. So for example, something like water and sewer, most of your performance measures are going to be at closeout. You have completed your construction, you have served a certain number of businesses and households, and that is the project. But for something like tourism development, and you're constructing a trail, you have constructed the trail at the end of the project, but no one's used it yet. So for the 3 years after that project has been completed, you would then want to estimate the number of new visitors that you think would use that trail, the number of businesses that would be served, improved, or created by having that new asset in your community. So the timeline of performance measures is important. You should have at least one output and outcome for your project. That's another division that we have in our performance measures. So the output would be something like water and sewer linear feet actually put in the ground. And an outcome would be the number of households that were improved by that linear feet. And then two, an explanation for how these measures are estimated, collected, and tracked. So how you estimated performance measures that you may not be able to see when the project closes, how you plan on collecting that actual data, and how that will be tracked in the future. So like I said, sorry, can you go back one slide just to make sure I covered everything? Oh, okay, that's a duplicate slide. Sorry about that. So some projects have standalone measures, which means that they're not connected to the output into the outcome necessarily. And when I show you the paired measures, this will make sense. Some outputs might be new visitor days, plans and reports that are created for a broadband project. It might be megabits per second. Access road miles, linear feet, square feet. Outcomes, the effect that your project has, might be businesses created or costs reduced. The asterisk and the delta at the bottom of the slide, the asterisks reference measures that require referencing jobs created and jobs retained, or talking about permanent full-time jobs as a result of the project activities. This does not include temporary contracting or construction jobs that are part of the project itself, although you may have part-time jobs that are created that are permanent, and those would be converted when you talk about the measures into the equivalent full-time positions. And then the delta talks about measures that require additional documentation. So if you are hoping to have jobs that are created or retained or leverage private investment that's part of your project, you would have to have a letter from a business that would be providing those jobs to describe and commit specifically to those measures in order to verify them. Next are our sample pair measures. And so you can see the difference from the standalone measures to the paired measures is that if you have an output that is a paired measure, you should also list that outcome and the same measure. So if you are serving businesses through an entrepreneurship program, then a certain number of those businesses should be improved by the activities of your project. It's important to note that the number of improved in that measure is always equal to or a subset of the number served. So one of the easiest examples of this is for students served or improved. If you have a project that is giving a certification to students, you might have 60 students enroll in the program, but only 50 graduate and complete the project. So that would be 60 students served by the program, but only 50 improved. If your definition of improvement is achieving that certification, having that additional qualification for their employment. All right, and I will move or give it to Megan to talk about serving and improving.
Great. So let's take a closer look at some of our paired measures, meaning if you serve these groups, you also need to demonstrate improvement. But right now, we're just going to take a look at what it means to actually serve these folks. So we're serving students or workers, which is a common one for ARC grants. If you're doing a workforce project or an education project, it means that you're going to be enrolling them in some type of academic or workforce training program. So you might be serving students by helping them complete the FAFSA forms or connecting them to internship programs. You could also serve workers by connecting them to wraparound support so they can get to their workplace site on time. If you're serving businesses, you may be providing them technical assistance, maybe related to accounting practices, or giving them support in how to work with SUD impacted employees. You could also serve a business by providing water or broadband services to them so they can better connect with their clients and customers. Communities is an interesting one because it really can have a range of definitions. The main point to remember is to be consistent with how you're defining communities and how you're going to serve them. And that really actually applies to any measure that you select, but it's particularly important here. Applicants typically define communities as the number of counties that will be impacted by the project, but you do have some flexibility as long as you're consistent. Next slide. And Sarah, I think this is you.
So improvement, as I mentioned earlier, for students improved could be however you'd like to define that. So obtaining employment, earning a diploma or certification, or passing an exam. Businesses improved. This one can be a little bit trickier, or businesses and communities can be improved. And this is where talking about how you're going to define that measure and how you're going to collect data on that measure, how you're going to track it matters a lot, because not all businesses want to talk about the amount of money that they make, but might talk about their expanded employment, expanding into a facility, or launching a new product or service. But there are also some other things that signing up for broadband service or connecting to water and sewer service, that's easier to track and to monitor in a project. Communities improved might develop or implement a plan, use the results of a plan to implement changes or make improvements. Again, it's the collecting that data, how you estimated it, and how you plan on tracking it are most important. Back to Megan.
Great. So here's a couple of definitions that folks sometimes confuse. So I wanted to point these out. So the first is the difference between students and workers / trainees. So you might have a project where employed individuals are enrolled in a degree-seeking program, like a bachelor's in nursing. So would those be students or workers? Technically, we would measure those folks as students. So if the individual's working towards a diploma or degree, they are considered a student. If they're developing job skills and not in a diploma or degree seeking program, they're considered workers trainees. So these would be your folks who are working to obtain credentials or certificate program where they are demonstrating their skills gained. Participants tends to have a looser definition, and many times these are considered sort of your light touch individuals or folks who may only come in contact with your project once or twice, or in a more inconsistent basis. So these could be people that attend maybe a conference or a workshop that's delivered as part of your project, or maybe they attend a lunch and learn session. Participants are often tracked through sign-in sheets or other similar tracking methods. Remember that you do need to keep records of all your measures. So if you propose to have 100 participants in the program, you need to have a system for tracking them, like a sign-in sheet. So participants, just to note that it's not a paired measure, so you aren't required to demonstrate improvement with these folks, but you need to have a clear method for showing how they've been served. And then businesses served are those that receive grant-related services and own a business that's been registered with the IRS and state. So these folks typically have a tax ID or EIN number. I just want to flag also, I know we're providing lots of content on measures. One thing to keep in mind here is less is more. Don't feel like you've got to go over the top and, you know, have a dozen different measures. What's really important is that you select several measures, even if it's just one or two that really clearly demonstrate what you're doing with your project. Sarah?
And that's a great transition for these. I'm just going to show these as a very quick guide, which you can reference later. But there are not more than 5 on any of these. And not all of these will be used for these types of projects. But this is just an easy visual to see for different kinds of projects, like a water and sewer project would have outputs that were linear feet, or the number of millions of gallons per day produced would be improving particular parts of your community. It might create or retain jobs. Next slide. Similarly, we have some other categories here. Feel free to go back and reference these. But if you have any questions about what measures might be appropriate for you, please reference the guide or talk to the state program manager staff at DHCD. All right, on to Megan.
All right. So here's a before and after example of a worker trainee performance measure. So in the incomplete example, the applicant initially had a measure as an opioid recovery training project. It's going to serve and improve 400 workers. So let's first look at the definition of serving these workers and trainees. How do we know if they've been served? So it's pretty unclear in the incomplete example. Does it mean they are just going to complete an intake form? Do they show up to their referral appointment? We really don't know. So in the better example, you'll see it's been revised with the bold text that they will be served through classes and workshops. And the applicant went even further to say the workers will attend at least 2 of the trainings. And this information is going to be tracked by registration records. So that's how they're going to demonstrate serving the workers. You'll also note that they provide a time frame here. They say the workers will be served by the end of the grant period, which is also helpful. The third bullet addresses improvement. So we know 400 workers will be served, and they've now provided a more realistic subset. When they say they're going to serve and improve all 400, it's just a little lazy. So here they've said, hey, we're going to do 250 will actually be approved. They also, in the better example, they note a time frame of 1 year after the grant. And remember, ARC grantees have up to 3 years post closeout of the grant to demonstrate the impact of the project. However, it should be stated in your original proposal. You can't say that like after the fact. So it's good to note that up front. The other thing with this example, they address how they're going to demonstrate improvement, which is going to be through the electronic surveys to confirm employment status. Next slide. Sarah?
All right. I think we have an option. Oh, sorry, I'm hearing some feedback on my end. I think we have the option to do this example or to take a 5-minute break, and I am good with whichever y'all would like to do. If you want to drop your preference in the chat, we can take a 5-minute break now, or we can talk briefly about performance measures example for a construction project. Keep going. All right. I see a project related question. I'm not seeing any 5-minute break. Okay. All right. We will power on. The question in the chat was, when does the clock on the 3-year period start? At the start of the project or from the end of construction? The 3-year period starts at the close date. So whenever the project ends, which depending on whether you got an extension for your project, may or may not be the original date that you put in your application. But from the date that your project is closed with ARC starts that 3-year period. The second example for performance measures, your project involves making upgrades to a county-owned industrial park building. The project will allow an existing industry to expand their operations, as well as bring a new complementary industry into the building. What measures might you use in an ARC application? And we've got some examples of outputs and outcomes, if anybody wants to drop suggestions in the chat. Well, there are some that you could probably exclude, like there won't be any patients or students served, probably not any organizations served by this project. There are definitely businesses that are going to be served. There's an industry that is going to expand, as well as a business that would enter into this industrial building. You're definitely going to improve some square feet. It would not be acreage, or would probably not be acreage in this project. You can look at the guidance to get that distinction between square feet and acreage, but square feet is generally building improvements. What additional documentation might you need? Well, you're going to have industries that are expanding. Ideally, they would also have some additional jobs that might be created or retained. They may also be bringing investment into this project that is not necessarily used for match, but will be a part of their business expansion. And that would be that leveraged private investment. And for any of those things, like we talked about, you would need that letter of commitment from those businesses in order to verify those measures for that project. So by thinking about the who and the what of the project, you can find the most important outputs and outcomes. All right, next slide. Our key takeaways, you should be able to describe in a narrative what your measures are, why they are most relevant and important, and that collection, tracking, measuring. Include a time frame for these projects, whether they'll be completed when your project is closed or within that 3-year period after your project has ended. Define what you mean when you serve and improve for particular measures, and link that to your tracking and measuring. Be able to provide supporting documentation for those measures that we talked about, which need letters that document jobs or financial commitment. And then, like I mentioned, leverage private investment is not a project match. This is separate funding, other investments that are made that come about as a result of your project. And then for the jobs retained, a nice way to think about this is imminent job loss that would happen if ARC funding isn't secured. And that phrase, if ARC did not fund this project, without this project, X would happen, is an important way to phrase that job retention performance measure. Okay. I think I'm going to turn it over to Megan for the budget.
Yep. Great. So let's talk forms. It wouldn't be a federal proposal without some forms, right? So this slide provides a nice outline of some of the different forms that are required for both non-construction and construction. We call these the 424 family of forms. So both types of projects will include the SF424, which is the application for federal assistance, as well as the ARC MOU. Things deviate a bit when we look at the form used for budget information. So this is the 424A for non-construction, and then 424C for construction. And then the assurances are covered in 424B for the non-construction and 424D for the construction. Next. Okay, so here's an overview of the SF424, which is sort of like the cover sheet. And it applies to both kinds of projects, so construction and non-construction. A couple things to highlight. You'll want to enter a start and end date. Make sure that that's, I'm not sure if you can see it very well, it's box 17. Area development projects typically have a 1-year project period. Some go as high as 3 years. And your ARC grant coordinator will likely confirm this time frame with you during the review process, since there's sometimes a time lapse between when it's submitted and queued up for our review. But do your best to gauge a reasonable time frame here. The authorized representative needs to sign the form, and this is the individual who is legally authorized to sign documents and agreements for the organization. This form was updated just last year, so if you have these bookmarked somewhere, just make sure you're using the most recent version. Now it includes a space for an entity's EIN, which is your tax ID number, as well as a UEI, which is a unique entity ID. And this relates to question 8. Not sure if you can see it there. So if you've applied for federal grants in the past, you probably had a DUNS number. Those are done away with now. But if you have a DUNS number, you've automatically been assigned one of these new UEI numbers. If this is totally new to you, just go to sam.gov and you can check your status. I think Rachel mentioned this at the get-go when we first started off. Just make sure you don't wait too long to go into SAM to register for a number, because it can take several weeks. All right, next slide. So here is a snapshot of the 424A form, which again is for non-construction projects. So this is essentially your budget and includes the budget line items for your project. ARC is most interested in sections A, B, and C of this 2-page document. So in section A, you'll want to list ARC as the grant program. And again, you guys are going to get copies of these slides, so you'll be able to see this in more detail. You can leave the CFDA number blank. And then you're going to move over to the other columns there in red, which are E, F, and G, which is where you'll list the total amount of ARC funding that's requested, your total matching funds that you're bringing to the table, and then your total project costs, which is going to be the 2 columns combined. The next section is B. This is where you're going to break down your budget by line item, and there are specific line items for you to follow. So you'll need to break down the ARC funds by line items in the first column, and then matching by line item in the next column. And then you can leave the next couple columns blank and then total everything in column 5. I don't know if you can see there, row 7 is program income. It's not very common with ARC projects, but we have recently been seeing kind of an uptick of these. So an example would be, so if you're planning an Inspire project and participants are creating a good or service that they intend to sell into the community, these proceeds would be considered program income, and you would note that here in this document. Next slide. So this second page of the 424A, again, it's not as critical to ARC, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but it's good information for you to have if you're applying for other grants. Section C is where you map out your match in a little bit more detail. D is your forecasted cash needs. And E is how you're going to plan the investment by year. Next slide. Sarah, I'm going to toss this over to you.
Yes, and here is the construction specific. So instead of the 424 B budget breakdown for non-construction, it's the 424C, which is construction. We don't break things by matching funds or ARC funds. It's the total project funds. And in this, it's a 1-page document. Only enter columns in A and C. That middle column, costs not allowable for participation. You're always going to leave that blank. There are a few lines where we expect to see some things. Grantees are expected to have administrative and engineering expenses in order to comply with federal laws and regulations. And so if we don't see any costs in those, I think it's 1, 4, and 5, a project analyst will probably ask you that question and wonder, how you're going to be covering those expected costs. Then there's construction and equipment are the most common and probably the largest budget line items you would have. We also have contingencies that are expected to be accounted for in times of supply chain disruptions, more so now. But this is also kind of a document that is for us, but is based on probably an engineer's report or a cost estimate that will be broken down in different ways. And so having that supplementary documentation that matches or correlates to this SF424C document, which might show those in slightly different categories, is important to show how those two documents relate to each other. So as long as you're able to cover understanding that there's going to be administrative and engineering costs, and that there should be contingencies built into your plan, that will be good for us in terms of the completion of the 424C.
Great. So the last portions of the 424 documents gets into all the fun kind of legalese stuff. And I'm going to just glaze over some of these just for time's sake, but I recommend that you do not glaze over them once you sign them. I know what it's like to be an applicant. I remember hitting the submit button and saying, sure, insurance, and sure, the MOU, but really to make sure you know what you're signing up for when you submit your proposal. So the 424 assurances, the B document is for non-construction projects. It says that you're going to, follow state and federal policies and regulations. That's the CFR 200 that we refer to a lot. You're going to secure your matching funds. You're attesting that you have the capacity to manage the project. The 424D, I think it's for construction projects. It talks about coordinating with basic agencies, things like that. Why don't we move on to the next? Yep. So here's the ARC MOU. These are conditions that apply to all ARC grants. So again, just make sure you read over this. It talks about Davis-Bacon wage rates for construction projects. It talks about if you have any changes to the scope of work, and what you need to do if you anticipate that. And it actually goes into detail and defines what is a change in scope, which is important to read through as too. And let's go to the next slide. All right, so additional project budget components. So the 424A, as I mentioned, is for non-construction. The C is for construction. And these will be your official budget documents for the project. But there are some additional components, including indirect costs, your budget narrative, your organization or agency's procurement policy, and of course, the much beloved ARC match requirements. Next slide. So indirect. So indirect costs can be covered with ARC funds. And this slide lists some examples of indirect costs in the first bullet. So things that are not directly related to the project, but they're necessary for the general operations. So things like rent, utilities, accounting services. You're probably familiar with these types of costs. If you do not have a federally approved indirect cost rate, you can opt to use the de minimis rate of 10%. And if you do have an approved rate, you'll need to submit that approval letter with your application package. No documentation is required if you use the 10% rate. However, I feel like I'm a broken record. Consistency is key here when you think about your indirect rate. So you need to make sure you're consistent with how you charge costs as indirect, and this might be included in your organization's policy document. So just be sure you're following whatever it is that you've stated in your official documents with how you track indirects. You also need to be consistent in how you charge indirects if you have multiple federal awards. So if you have a federally approved rate of 20% and you're charging that to a Department of Labor grant, but then you decide to just charge 10% to your ARC grant, that's not good practice, and it could be flagged in an audit. So in that example, if you're trying to be cost conscious, and we definitely appreciate that, you could use your 20% indirect rate, but ask that ARC cover 10%, and maybe you want to apply the other 10% as your match. So you could do that. Consistency is key. So if you have multiple federal grants, you just want to make sure that your practice is consistent. One thing also to mention here is the modified total direct cost, which essentially means you need to exclude several things, and it's all listed out here, like equipment, capital expenditures, rental costs, scholarships, in how you calculate your direct costs. It also means you only include the first $25,000 of each sub-grant included in your project budget. So if you have a sub-grant of $30K in your project, you only factor in the first $25,000 of that in your calculation. This only applies to sub-grants, not contracts. And this is an important distinction to make that we'll get a little bit more into the budget narrative section. I know there's a lot here, and you can find more about it in the CFR. Your state program manager can also be a good resource And ARC, if it makes it to our desk, we do a pretty good job of looking at this in more detail as well. But just, in the auditor's eyes, it's the applicant. It's
Megan, I think you got muted.
That's weird. You guys have been hearing me this whole time, right? Good. All right, so let's get into budget narrative. So in addition to the budget you submit with the 424, you also want to put together a budget narrative. And we have a template on our website under those grant resources. You can use that. And the table here on this slide is a nice snapshot of what can be included in your budget narrative. So essentially, everything in your budget narrative should tie back to your scope of work. So if suddenly you list travel in your budget narrative, but there's no mention of travel or maybe conferences or site visits in your work plan, that's going to draw some questions. Excel can be a great tool to use for your budget narrative versus writing it in a Word document. So in the example here, you can see the larger line item categories aligned to those budget categories in the 424. So you'll see the larger buckets of the personnel, the supplies, equipment, and then each major line item goes into additional detail related to specific personnel job titles. Their how many hours they worked, their rate of pay. And then for construction project, the budget narrative should also align to the professional engineer report and include an engineer seal. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So speaking a little bit about match, this is a good format that you can use to capture all your different match funding. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this one either, but it's just a nice example. You can see how they've talked if something is committed or secured. Your match is not required to be committed at the time you send in your proposal. Just know in order for the award to actually be approved, it does need to be confirmed. Next slide. And Sarah, this is you.
So as Megan mentioned, for specifically construction projects, provide a detailed and recent engineer or architect construction budget, generally within a year is preferable. Could be an opinion of probable cost, architectural estimate. This will probably be the greatest basis for the construction budget narrative. And you can also draw from the kind of expanded explanation of this PER sometimes for your strategic rationale for your project narrative. If the budget was created as part of a multi-phase project, please separate out anything that would be ARC or match covered costs from that created budget. And be consistent on the standard forms, the detailed budget, the project narrative, and the basic agency letter. The consistency, again, is important. All of those numbers should match up. What's on each line item should at least correlate, or if it doesn't and there are discrepancies, the narrative should explain how those totals come together.
All right, so match. And we just have a few more slides here. So ARC grants do require a match, and the amount of match is determined by your project service area. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. Matching funds, it's essentially any funds or resources contributed to the project outside of the ARC investment, and they must be verified by that commitment letter. I know sometimes folks kind of think of match as a big headache, but there's actually quite a bit of value embedded in the match process. So one of the real benefits of matching, or which is sometimes considered cost share, is that it helps with sustainability. So by securing match funds, it shows to the funder that others have skin in the game and see the value of the project. It can also be helpful to show funders outside of ARC once the project sunsets that you have the capacity and momentum to really administer a project of scale. Again, they can come from a variety of sources that you see right here. I think I saw a question pop out in the match period. Essentially, the match period should align with the grant period. So the two should be very similar. Let's go to the next slide. All right, match requirements. This slide goes into how the match rate is calculated, and it's determined by the county economic status. Again, you can find a lot of this information on our website. You can see the match rate kind of varies and fluctuates based upon if it's a distressed county at 20% to a 50% match for transitional counties. ARC typically doesn't fund projects that are based solely in attainment counties. One thing too is that I would like to make a plug for this. When you're calculating the match, you want to first identify the total project cost. Then you calculate what 80% or 70% based on the county designation. I've seen folks sometimes make mistakes here. They assume that they are responsible for 20% of the award versus 20% of the total project cost. And it can get a little tricky. We can talk about this later, maybe if there's some more time. Next slide. So here are the Virginia County designations. I think Rachel went into this earlier. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is where things get kind of fun. So calculating multi-county projects. And again, you can always ask the state, your state program manager for assistance with this process if you need help. But if you have multi-counties, there's a couple different ways you can calculate. So first of all, if half the counties are distressed, ARC is going to cover 80% of the total project costs. The second example here is if half of the counties are a combination of distressed and at risk, the project can be funded up to 70% or a 30% match. And if neither of these scenarios fits the project, we average the percentage applicable to the counties in the project. And the next slide, I think, shows us an example. Yep. So here we've got 5 counties. None of them are distressed. So we're going to average the possible percentages. And you can see on the table on the right, we've got 70 for the 2 at risk, 50 for the 3 transitional, and that gives us an average match rate of 42%. Next slide, match commitment letters. So once you determine your match rate and identify all your close friends who believe in your work and they want to contribute to your project, you need to document that commitment in a match commitment letter from the match source. The letter should be on their letterhead or some type of official document. You can apply other grant funds, including federal funds, for ARC grants. It's kind of unique. So you'd want to include the award letter or notification of that. And you need to make sure the other federal agency approves that. There are several things that need to be in that match letter, such as the dollar amount, a signature, obviously, if it's in-kind services, how it's calculated. If real estate is being offered as a match, you need to have a certified appraisal as part of the documentation. But yeah, all matches have to be fully committed prior to the grant award. Okay, sustainability, next slide. So for sustainability and organizational capacity, you want to talk about any previous experience you might have had performing similar activities. You can also briefly summarize qualifications, specific staff. I know, a lot of times people don't want to be thinking about, how they're going to sustain the project and get more funding right when they're submitting a new grant, but it is an important part of the project. So we want to see sort of a long-term strategy for financial and operational sustainability. It's okay if it's not fully fleshed out, but we need to know that you're kind of thinking about the future. Sarah, I'll toss it to you for the next slide.
All right, taking us home, last 2 slides. For construction projects, sustainability, the PER may identify who will own and maintain any construction improvements. An asset management plan that talks about technical sustainability. If it's for a business or other kind of building management or business management, a feasibility study or a business plan. For business projects, things like a pro forma that will talk about how that project will continue on after ARC's investment. And if as part of the project development, it becomes clear that that might be a difficult thing to produce before the project application is submitted. We always have planning grants available that can precede implementation grants to help solidify some of these things. Next slide. As we talked about, there were a lot of different links, a lot of different resources. Please feel free to reference this slide at a later point if you need it. Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Lauren Wood to talk a little bit about our Inspire program. All right.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Let's make sure. All right. I think everyone should be able to see this now. Again, it's great to be with you today to discuss ARC's substance use disorder efforts. So I know we're on a bit of a tight timeline. We have like 10 or so minutes left. So I'm going to run through this quickly. I apologize for that, but just certainly remember that I'm always available for follow-up questions after you've had time to dig into Inspire and the RFP. So the Inspire initiative was really created back in 2019 or in 2020, actually, with the knowledge, right, that individuals across Appalachia are disproportionately affected by a number of chronic health disparities, especially that of drug use and certain behavioral health disorders. So in an effort to really tackle the drug use epidemic in Appalachia, ARC hosted listening sessions back in 2019 into 2020. We convened a SUD advisory council with subject matter expert representatives from really across the region to understand, right, the region's challenges, successes, and its assets in moving the needle to not just reduce substance use rates, but also to increase recovery capital and really this population's chances at meaningful employment. And so it's through that lens of building and strengthening economically resilient communities that ARC sees this ecosystem as a complex linkage of multiple sectors, right? So here you'll see on this visual, it's, you know, your health and human services agencies, your faith-based entities, criminal justice, housing, transportation, the whole lot, and of course employers, with again that foundational goal of the ecosystem really being driven by helping individuals in SUD recovery access those support services that they need and the training they need to maintain that recovery and successfully enter or re-enter the workforce. So though our Inspire funding and our grantee-based activities have only been in operation since April of 2021, and that's when we released our first round of funding, we now have 3 cohorts of grantees that are engaging in my opinion, not biased at all, but really phenomenal work. So as you'll see from this slide, the map on the right there shows our cumulative counties served to date through Inspire. So in total, there's 289 counties served through all 3 of those rounds. We've got a total investment to date of $28.5 million across 84 projects. And then the map on the left shows that there's 3 states tied at having the most involvement with the Inspire initiative. So as you can see, there's Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And hopefully in this coming round, we can see more applications coming out of Virginia so we can spur some competition with Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And then here, I just wanted to give you, if my slides, there we go. Just wanted to give you an overview of who's received Inspire funding to date from Virginia. So you'll see that current grantees are really spread out across the state, and each grantee is focused on anywhere from 1 county to 6 or more counties in their respective project scope of work. And all projects are, of course, you know, like I said before, focused on building out or improving the SUD recovery workforce ecosystem, with each one kind of tackling its own piece of the pie. So I'm not going to go through every single grant that you see here, but just wanted to give you a snippet. So, for example, in Henry and Patrick counties, we've got the Piedmont Regional Community Services Board. They've got an implementation grant with us, and they are focused on, again, expanding that workforce ecosystem to serve more individuals affected by substance use disorder. And they're really navigating that by building out their partnerships with employers to hire more individuals in recovery and also improve a lot of the partnerships in their vocational training program. to not just support the needs of those with SUD or those in the SUD population, but they're also focused on community agencies and as such as faith-based entities. They have a pretty specific focus on faith-based entities. Then we have a new planning grantee. They're the YWCA of Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. They're investigating their local and regional SUD recovery programming through a SWOT analysis, right? So that's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. They're also identifying some unmet needs through a gap analysis, through focus groups, and recovery surveys of individuals, organizations, and businesses and employers in Washington and Smith counties. So certainly a lot to run out for a 12-month planning grant, but they definitely hit the ground running in September. And then finally, as I've said a couple of times now, again, all of our Inspire projects are focused on a number of activities through that lens of building out, improving, and strengthening the SUD recovery to work ecosystem model. And it's really through that lens that there are some very common evidence-based or some promising strategies that grantees are really using to craft their program. So as you can see from this slide, there's a number that are working to really understand needs to inform that continuum of recovery services, right? So not just connecting folks to those SUD services and the workforce training, but it's also other services that promote access to, housing and transportation, family reunification, legal supports, and other similar kind of service provisions. We have others that are creating sustainability by starting or expanding their social enterprises, right? So providing that financial gain to the organization or the institution, as well as financial literacy for their clients. And I think, most importantly throughout this work, if you take nothing else from this slide, is really just the value and the need for fostering strong partnerships, not just within community, but obviously to the extent that it's feasible, really partnerships across the state. And equally important to that is fostering those partnerships with, I know many of you are LDDs on today, right? But fostering partnerships with LDDs, your economic development agencies, those faith-based communities, treatment providers, and then, of course, local or regional employers. And I know we've got 4 minutes left, so I'm going to try and wrap this up in a minute. And I have a few more slides. I apologize. The major takeaway from this is at 2 p.m. today, and you all are lucky enough to get a sneak peek into this, but at 2 p.m. today, ARC is going to be releasing our round 4. This should say round 4, not round 3. Apologies for that. But we're releasing our round 4 request for proposal. And if I can go ahead and just put in the website here for the Inspire initiative. So you can certainly start to dive into that. Again, reach out to me with any questions. There's a number of opportunities. We've got a bunch of pre-application workshops, both virtual and in person. Final applications are going to be due March 17th by 5 p.m. close of business. Again, you'll get these slides. So not worried about diving into each one. And then to sum this up in terms of the ARC happenings going into 2023, we have a RISE, that's an open rolling application cycle. We've got obviously Inspire that's going to be released this afternoon. Our Power initiative is going to be announced in mid-February. Our Work initiative will be announced sometime in March. And then related to our capacity building initiatives, we've got academies and institutes, and specifically the Academy at Oak Ridge STEM program. That opportunity closes, or application cycle closes, February 10th. And again, for already LDDs, similar to Arise, that applications are accepted on a rolling basis with quarterly reviews of applications. And finally, we've got a number of, as I mentioned before, a number of in-person workshops that are going to be held in Mississippi, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania. I don't think we've released that to a registration to the public yet. So certainly just, keep a pulse on arc.gov's website for more information on those. But with that, thank you. I apologize for needing to run through this quickly. Always just email me, happy to answer questions and talk more about our health portfolio and certainly Inspire, but I will hand it back over to you, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. Just closing this up, I'm going to share just some upcoming opportunities with DHCD. These are just some other things going on at DHCD, but the first item are specific that would be helpful to you guys is we are conducting ARC one-on-one TA sessions February 6th and 7th. Those will be virtual. The times right now, pretty much all day from 9 to 11 or 2 to 5. We encourage you to sign up for one-on-one 30-minute sessions. And yeah, that's just the time for application questions, project ideas, feedback on any ideas that you have. And we'll just go over specifics during that session. So reach out to me or Matt or any one of the DHCD staff here, and we'll get you scheduled for those. But for now, that is it. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you again, ARC, for joining us. And again, this will be recorded and up on the DHCD webpage soon, so stay tuned. Yeah, any questions, just feel free to reach out. But thank you again all so much. I'm just going to stay on for a few more minutes just in case anybody has any burning questions. But yeah, hope you all have a good day. Thanks.